This, I had a look into a study that was recently done by the organization Bitcoin, and it says that 88% of those entitled to vote believe that foreign actors are trying to manipulate via social media the outcome of the election. And when I saw that, I said to myself, this might be a good starting point for tonight's event. What I didn't know and what I didn't expect is that in light of the discussions we have here in the Munich Security Conference, that it became a rather hot topic. And I just want to say, I believe very much that it is not only in our interest, but we have to know if foreign actors or their proxies are trying to intervene in our elections, be it openly or disguised. We have to know who they are, where they are coming from, and what objectives they are after, and we have to take the necessary means. The origins, when it comes to these, but when it comes as well to other manipulations, and that is the subject of this discussion we will have tonight here this evening, the origins of these manipulations can be state or non-state actors. And indeed, many states, as you know, use the cyber and information space to achieve their objectives through cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, cyber espionage, cyber sabotage, or state-directed disinformation and manipulation campaigns. States have been expanding their capabilities for years. They often rely on their own infrastructure, cyber forces, and disinformation agents, but in some cases, they also make use of external resources. Military and intelligence units act directly on behalf of states. At the same time, cybercriminal and private groups operate in the cyber and information space as digital proxies. In return, they receive state approval for their business practices and/or financial support. We know that there exists close cooperation between certain states such as Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and private actors and cybercriminal groups. These groups support states in achieving their objectives, making it difficult to attribute attacks precisely or track actions in the digital space. And for the victims of these attacks, responding is challenging. Was the actor, the attacker, a state actor, an intelligence service, a military union, or a cybercriminal organization? Boundaries can be blurred. In this event, ladies and gentlemen, we want to find answers to the following questions. What defines digital proxies and why are states increasingly relying on them? What advantages do digital proxies offer, and are they as well equipped as states? What do they get in return? How do geopolitical frameworks influence the structure and scope of digital proxy groups? I'm sure we will have a very stimulating discussion today. And before we will have so, and before I can invite the President, Karl, here of the intelligence here on the podium, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Christian Bergmann. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wahlers. Ladies and gentlemen, dear esteemed guests and experts, politicians from all over the world, dear honored guests, I see many young faces in this room, and I'm very pleased to all have you here. My name is Dr. Christian Bergmann. I'm representing a dedicated young team of professionals of the Alumni Club, the Verein der Altstipendiaten, of the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, as well as their expert security policy network. First, I want to thank the America House as well for their hospitality, the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, dem Verein der Altstipendiaten, because we have been here at the MSc 5 years ago for the very first time, and ever since, throughout all these years, it has been an excellent teamwork effort between the Altstipendiaten and our big brother, the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. The reason why we as a team of professionals from Munich, Berlin, Frankfurt, Monaco, Vienna, and other places are here year for year to organize an event at the Munich Security Conference is because we believe we need a broad, we need a public, and we need a transparent debate on these complicated issues. So welcome to this crucial discussion. Today we confront one of the defining challenges of our times, I would say, cyber warfare and the rise of hackers as proxies for rogue states. This isn't science fiction, it is happening, and it is happening every day. So how do we defend ourselves, and against whom are we defending ourselves? We want you to leave this event being better informed about the threats that we as a society are facing, not only in Germany but globally. And we do not want to instill fear, but we want to enable you to be ambassadors in the broader public to shape an informed debate. So I am very pleased to announce now our speakers. We will have at our panel debate, which are Lena Dupont, member of the European Parliament, Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs at the European People Party Group, and she's also a member of the subcommittee of the European Democracy Shield. I want to welcome Lieutenant General Michael Vetter, Director General and Chief Information Officer at the German Federal Ministry of Defense. I want to welcome Pavlina Pavlova, Fellow at New America in Washington, D.C., and our moderator, Johannes Steger, Editorial Director on Digitization and AI, Cybersecurity and Smart City at Tagesspiegel background. But before we get to our panel, it's my special honor to introduce you as our keynote speaker, Dr. Bruno Karl, President of the Germany's Federal Intelligence Service. And I have to say up front, Dr. Karl will address us and unfortunately has to leave by 6 p.m. But I can only assume that your schedule is very dense this weekend, so it is even more precious for us, and we are even more grateful to have you. Thank you very much, Dr. Karl, and please come on stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very polite introduction, Dr. Bergmann, Dr. Ahlers. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent years and decades, we as security agencies and intelligence services have had to deal with a progressive dissolution of boundaries when it comes to crisis, conflict, and war. This challenges affects several dimensions of our work. A clear distinction between domestic and external security is no longer practicable and neither politically nor legally tenable. Similarly, the boundaries between the real and the digital world are becoming blurred. And finally, the lines between state and non-state actors are becoming increasingly entangled and permeable from year to year and from conflict to conflict. Ever interstate wars are increasingly subject to privatization and commercialization. Combatants are more and more difficult to distinguish from civilians, and state officials harder to tell apart from cunning businessmen, clever criminals, or Islamistic terrorists. The little green men on the Crimean Peninsula, Hamas and Hezbollah, terrorists since the 7th October 2023, and Prigozhin's Wagner Group are only a few examples of supposedly private military actors who interfered in essentially interstate conflicts and sometimes even tipped the balance. Russia, in particular, has been using the deployment of covert groups without insignia to pursue its interests and exert geopolitical influence with circumventing international law. Also, in an intelligence context, Russia recruits so-called single-use or low-level agents to conceal and intensify its hybrid attacks against countries of the political West. For one thing, these single-use agents replace Russia's own professional spies who have been expelled from many European countries and can no longer operate under the diplomatic cover of their embassies. But apart from that, they are also a pragmatic and useful addition to the Russian intelligence community. They are cheap and easy to recruit via social media, for example. They are inconspicuous, anonymous, and flexible, quickly and universally deployable, often unaware of the actual mission and/or the overall operational plan. Daring, as they are not aware of the consequences and illegality of their actions, and finally, quickly and easily discardable. Sometimes single-use agents also have particular access, context, or capabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, the dissolution of boundaries is not limited to the physical battlefield. It also concerns cyberspace, where, apart from the Russian administration and its intelligence services, also numerous non-state players operate. Just like their public sector counterparts, these non-state actors spread propaganda and disinformation on the internet and above all in social media. They conduct cyber espionage against political actors, administrations, companies, and research institutions, and hack into the critical infrastructure of their opponents to carry out sabotage or at least prepare them. Since February 2022, we have observed hacktivist actors on both sides in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine fighting each other. But the ambitions of Russian cyber actors clearly extend far beyond Ukraine's borders. Globally, we are observing persistent Russian and pro-Russian cyber activities. Only a small fraction of these efforts is publicly known. These include intensive espionage by Russian cyber actors against Ukrainian and Western targets, acts of cyber sabotage against Ukrainian entities, disinformation campaigns targeting the entire Western political sphere, particularly our NATO partners in Central and Eastern Europe, and repeated overload attacks by Russian hacktivists against Western institutions. Already in the first hours of the military campaign vicious cyber attacks against Ukraine were observed. On both sides, also non-state actors are supporting the warring parties with cyber attacks. On the Ukrainian side, calls by the government and by the hacker collective Anonymous quickly took effect. A large number of non-state hacktivists manipulated and overloaded Russian and Belarusian government networks and selected economic sectors. Also, hack and leak actions, for example, against the Russian Central Bank or Rosatom, could be observed. In addition to these hard cyber attacks, influencing the opponent's information space through relatively soft attacks like propaganda or disinformation is becoming increasingly important. The best example are the Russian bot farms. In this context, the establishment of a decentralized Ukrainian IT volunteer movement, the so-called International IT Legion, is remarkable. Its mission is to defend the cyberspace against Russian propaganda and to take action against the increasingly closed-off Russian information space. Ladies and gentlemen, in our context, I must also address criminal groups that primarily pursue financial motives but often achieve a political effect in favor of Russia. In recent years, the groups carrying out attacks with ransomware have become highly professionalized and industrialized. Just as one can rent computers, data storage, and business processes as a service online, one can also order cyber attacks. The individuals behind the most active and powerful ransomware groups are largely based in Russia. While they are primarily financially motivated, some groups have taken a political stance in the context of Ukraine war. At the same time, cybercriminals are benefiting from the most recent critical geopolitical developments. The war against Ukraine, for example, has actually strengthened Russia's role as safe haven for cyber criminals. Russian authorities are passive in persecuting cybercrime, but very likely know which ransomware actors operate from Russia. We must therefore assume that sensitive data obtained through ransomware attacks will also find its way to Russian intelligence services if it is of interest to them, even if the victim has paid the ransom. From these intersections of crime and politics, we can infer the typical motivations of non-state hackers operating in Moscow's interests. They are, on the one hand, financial gain and, on the other hand, ideological proximity, or a combination of both. In some cases, for example, Moscow doesn't even spend any money on the social media activists who spread fake news or carry out complex disinformation campaigns on its behalf. Instead, these non-state actors live off advertising revenue from the relevant online platforms which they generate by spreading their narratives and half-truth. Ladies and gentlemen, so much for input from the Bundesnachrichtendienst. Let me conclude with a prediction that to most of you will probably not come as a big surprise. Russia will resort to its entire potential of hybrid measures to undermine Germany's and Europe's ability to act, both at political and societal level. This also includes the increase in quantity and quality of cyber attacks by Russian state actors and their proxies. Thank you very much.
cybersecurity is no longer merely a technical issue, but a critical challenge, impacting national security, social stability, and economic development. Taiwan faces various challenges in cybersecurity. These include an intensified international situation, ever-changing cyber attack methods, targeted cyber attacks from foreign adversaries and hackers.
Iran is actively perpetrating cyber attacks across numerous countries in the Middle East, America, and in Europe, including, of course, Israel and Germany. Hezbollah terror group is Iran's main partner. Together, they are jointly perpetrating cyber attacks against Israel. The network also includes Hamas, which deployed DDoS attacks on October 7th and also live-streamed horrific and murderous acts on the social media accounts of their victims. In the ongoing conflict, we have observed a sharp increase in cyber attacks and digital influence campaigns led by Iran and its proxies.
Under these challenges, cybersecurity protection may be implemented more efficiently by establishing an international joint defense system, enhancing cooperation with like-minded countries, and strengthening intelligence sharing.
What can we do? We can expose these actions, we can demand accountability from rogue states, we should address the issue of cyber terror, we should work together with the big tech and social media platform on preventive measures, and most importantly, we should work together to protect our societies. Shalom, and have a fruitful discussion. Danke.
Before we start with our great panel, we have an exercise, and the exercise is making you all ambassadors. So it's already a task we need to achieve. And so I would like you to scan this QR code. It's not a scam, I promise. It's Slido. And you can insert your questions for while we discuss. Please use it. We will have approximately 20 minutes to discuss your questions, and you can also use a mic and address our great panelists. And maybe let's start with something after President Karl gave us an intro, General Vetter, to make a common ground knowledge. Why is there a need for the use of proxies?
Well, first of all, hello from my side. Thank you for having me here on the panel. I think pretty much has been already said by President Karl and during the introduction. I would probably start by saying how is NATO looking at what's going on currently. And NATO has characterized what we call the future operating environment, so where also our military forces have to adjust to, by using 3 words: persistent, simultaneous, and boundless. Persistent meaning that we are living in an age where we see persistent confrontation, persistent confrontation with states, rivalries with states, and this is going to last for quite a long time. Simultaneous is the situation that we have to cope with nations who are our partner in economics, who are competitor in economics, who are our strategic rivals when it comes to being a democratic state or an autocratic state, and who are our adversaries with regard to cyberspace, for example, because they attack us constantly. And the third one, boundless, is that what President Karl said, that it's no longer this clear, distinctive line between peace, crisis, and war that we all grew up with, the distinction between internal and external security, where in Germany we really have an issue. And actually, if an attacker is smart, he looks at our architecture and tries to attack at the intersection, hoping the Germans would sort out responsibility for a couple of weeks before really answering and responding. So, proxies. The common feature in this boundlessness is hybrid action. And hybrid action necessitates that any attacker has a huge interest to stay below the threshold of open military hostilities. And proxies are an ideal tool to disguise who is really attacking us. And President Karl and the Israeli and Taiwanese ministers have shown us clearly that this is the interest of state actors to have organizations acting on their behalf without being attributed as a state action. So proxies serve a purpose, and actually nobody, I think, assumes that in Russia anything goes on without Putin's consent, that in China anything goes on without President Xi's consent, and the same is true for Iran and North Korea. So it helps malicious actors to disguise their really objective, making it for us as liberal democracies extremely difficult to respond in a proper way. Especially if you're wearing uniform and we're talking about military responses.
Understood.
In a nutshell, very shortly. Yeah.
Pavlina, maybe coming to you as a researcher, when we look, General Vetter mentioned I would say, 3 major actors. We have China, Russia, and Iran. What are their goals? Is there an overall strategy they try to pursue? And can you elaborate a little bit how they differ maybe and how they use proxies to achieve this strategy?
Thank you very much for having me, first of all. It's a great pleasure to be here, and especially to talk on this exciting topic and very important. We definitely see differences. We also see evolvement of the activities, and we see also more aggressivity on different sides. And I think what is, I especially focus on like Russian and Chinese actors, and what we see with Russia is the great advantage they have from the proxies. You keep them sanctuary, and then they deploy attacks in line of, without written instructions, in line with your strategy. So they align their activities with your strategy, and we observe with the intelligence services in Russia different loose, informal cooperation. Each unit will have, for example, different collaboration. Some will observe what the actors are doing. Some will maybe see what tools they are doing. Some will have their own units who do very sophisticated attacks and get into the networks. And then you have many ransomware groups who will be damaging critical infrastructure and businesses in your adversary countries. So for them, it's a great advantage, and this is why it's so difficult to stop it, because once you have a jurisdiction which is not giving away cybercriminal groups and is not punishing them and it's not working with you and is not exchanging the electronic evidence that you need, there are many limitations on what you can do, and we will speak about them later. So Russia is more, as I see these activities, they're more, they're organized in a way, but also very disorganized. It's like you go out, do these, do whatever suits your financial interests, as long as it aligns with us. Otherwise, you will have a problem. And there is understanding what the lines are. And we definitely saw increase of these activities with the full-scale invasion in Ukraine. We've seen many different attacks, and the introduction was really a great overview of what were the problems. We saw especially DDoS attacks, which are also, these are disruptive attacks, but the activity that they disrupt operational activity or capacity, but it's temporary. But then we have data breaches, which are very impactful for populations, because these can be large-scale attacks, like hack and leak operations of very sensitive data, such as medical data. And then we have ransomware groups, which I mentioned, which are a key issue, especially in attacks on critical infrastructure. And then we have very sophisticated actors which are positioning inside the networks, positioning for preparing maybe for potential future conflicts, getting into the infrastructure, so they are able to pull the switch when it comes to it and influence your foreign policy. And of course, cyber espionage with sophisticated actors and state-affiliated actors into public administration, into data, into political parties' accounts, etc. So this is Russian activities. And when it comes to Chinese activities, they're way more, I mean, they're different in a sense that when it comes to the state-sponsored activities, they're extremely sophisticated. When it comes to the recent, for example, public attributions in the US of Salt Typhoon and World Typhoon, these are extremely sophisticated, hard to deploy state-supported operations which are preparing for large-scale disruptions in the future, which are infiltrating the networks, first of all, telecommunications with all the data, but also public administrations with data, and then critical sectors such as water, wastewater systems, energy systems, in some cases even healthcare. So we see very strategic positioning and preparing for potential geopolitical conflict, and then be able to exert the pressure on the governments. Because once you have, and this is the problem that I focus on in my research, is that there is increasing rate of attacks on critical infrastructure, which we see as disturbance for now. But they are larger and larger, especially I focus currently on healthcare. So in healthcare sector, you definitely see that because the need is very critical. If you don't have blood donations, for example, as it happened to the NHS system in the UK, you see it immediately. But with other disruptive and ransomware attacks, such as the attack in Slovakia on land registry, we still see it as a disturbance, and there is a little recognition of these actors basically using us as a trial ground for the future and what they can deploy in the future and positioning for the future. So there is a lot of strategy on the side. It may be more, my point was that it may be more loose strategy. It's not like everything is predetermined and organized, but there is also very high level of sophistication, and we still very little know about preparing for these long-term disruptions. And we saw parallels with Corona, when there was disruption to healthcare system, transportation, etc., that as a society we are not ready for it. And if you imagine that large-scale disruptions can cause this to your critical infrastructure, and then the actors conduct the attacks that they want in the parts of the world they want, we are not ready for this, and we need to get ready.
General Vetter, would you like to, you just nodded a lot, you would like to add something?
I absolutely agree with what she's saying, because the complexity is increasing, the smartness of the aggressor is increasing. I would agree that the main effort in China traditionally was more espionage and especially in the industrial sector, get to know knowledge about our industrial capabilities and make best use of them. But this is shifting. So they are also more active in disinformation regarding the whole Taiwan issue, for example, and the sophistication of the attacks is increasing. In Russia, I would also give you one example, Killnet. Killnet has been a cybercriminal group, and since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, they disguised themselves as hacktivists to support Putin's cause. But in the end, it's the same cybercriminals. And as long as cybercriminals in Russia don't harm Russian economy or Russian politics, they are tolerated by the Kremlin, and now they are used as hacktivists to act in front of the good cause of the Russian Federation. So, yeah, 100% consent.
You know, maybe as a politician, you look at all these groups arranging attacks on Europe, disinformation, foreign information manipulation, cyber attacks. Where do you focus at the moment? What are your main concerns you see as a politician on the European scale?
Well, first of all, also from my side, thanks for having the debate here and really showing the broad angles from which you can look at the topic as such. Because I think that this is actually what makes proxies so successful. They use us as a training ground to further elaborate their sophisticated instruments, their tactics, their techniques. They combine, they break the silos between the Russian interest, the Chinese interest, the Iranian interest. And by that, they are creating a situation where it's very, very difficult also from the legal perspective, from an institutional perspective, to find an answer to that. Because whatever brings them together is actually, you found a solution to one cyber threat, you found a solution to one attack, and it immediately changes. So what we need at political level, both at European level but also at national level, is actually finding an infrastructure, finding a body that is persistent in its structure, that can work with a lot of force, in the combination, by the way, because we are not yet breaking silos. And this is one of the biggest problems, actually, at the political level. So our adversaries are breaking the silos, but we aren't. And this needs to change, because we need to combine the European knowledge, the national knowledge, the military knowledge, the civilian side. Do not forget about the civilian side of that, because the effects are, in any case, in the society and at the level of each and every one of us here. And this is what we actually need to do. So finding a structure, finding the legal grounds that at the same time railguard us, because we're an open society, we are based on law, we are a huge fan of rule of law, although it has been quite intensively discussed, especially in the last days. We are still that, and we should go on with that. But at the same time, be as flexible as possible, in a sense of, again, I'm coming back to probably the main message here, breaking the silos between the international level, the European level, national level, the civilian side, the military side, and combine the forces as much as we can, and pool the expertise, actually.
General Vetter, I think you said on Thursday or Friday on the cybersecurity conference that you won't succeed without the civilian side and the public-private partnerships there. So before we go into the measurements, I would like to ask you, because you all use the QR code, and we have a question for you. So please answer. It's about psychology a little bit and perception of proxies. And please answer, has your view on the impact of cyber proxies in modern conflicts changed? And I think after October 7th, after the Ukraine invasion, we all learned a lot. And while we discuss that, I think psychology, Pavlina, is a huge gain. And Elena also mentioned that the individual is targeted as well. What do you see? What do you think? What are the main goals in individuals proxies try to achieve, or to change maybe, or to target? Lena, you going first, and then Lena.
What do they try to target as amongst populations to harm them? They try to target whatever they can, and they try to inflict harm. And this is why I mentioned in my first intervention that there is very little understanding of the harm. And it's not only nice to have to understand the harm from cyber attacks, it's absolutely necessary to understand the attacker, how to prevent the harm and how to respond in times of crisis to that. And what I've seen, I specifically focused on gender and vulnerable populations, because what have been observed is that with some ransomware groups, for example, when they conduct attacks against the healthcare facilities, what they do on the top is publish, for example, diagnosis, medical data, which inflict harm on the population, so specifically on them. Or we've seen with, it was years ago, with Iranian proxy who leaked a database of queer individuals. So you try to, so these are typical attacks when you use populations as your leverage, how to harm the country. And because these current conflicts are hybrid, so you're just trying to inflict whatever harm you can. So if you have, it's all about then about societal resilience. So if you know that, for example, certain mental diagnoses or sexual and reproductive health are critical, if you know that certain minorities or vulnerable communities may be suffering more, you'll try to do that. And you'll try to do that. And what is exceptionally, where's the complexity going in the past years is that you see coming from motives which were purely financial with ransomware organizations. And now on the top of that, because of the growing geopolitical tensions, they will inflict that harm on the populations just because they can, just because they try what it does to you. And it's about like also the long-term, part of it is like the short-term disruption, but then you have also long-term financial, psychological harms, and then you have the harms to trust in the institutions. Do I trust if I was, for example, harmed as a ransomware, as a private company, and I never received any compensation, help, law enforcement support, or answer who was that, what happened to my data? Do I trust my institutions? If my results, medical results, were published on the dark web, do I trust my institutions? So this is also part of this developments that we see, that harm is becoming a big factor, and it's often, this discussion started with like hacktivists, but we are also, and hacktivism is one thing that you do it for purely political, ideological reason, but we see sophisticated ransomware as a service groups who do it on the top because they know that it's something that the regime wants. It's something that aligns with them. So it has this geopolitical significance.
You talking about trust in institutions. How do you counter that? How do you regain trust if there is an attack like where your data is leaked?
Well, I think also a bit picking up on what you just said, I would say there are even more, but 3 main reasons. And it doesn't matter, or main effects also on a psychological level, and it doesn't matter if you speak about a public entity, a private entity, an enterprise, or an individual. It's first to intimidate. It's second to destabilize at a certain extent, to do so to sow distrust that way around. And in the end, the most effectful thing is that you're kind of disrupting the bonds of society, whether it's institutionally or individually. Because the main message behind all these attacks, it's not necessarily do not believe or do believe me as an actor. It's mainly do not believe anyone. And the topics are of such a variety. It's whatever floats the boat. This is, of course, again, coming a bit back to the point I previously made, a bit difficult to answer on an institutional level, because we have institutions who have a certificate way of, and specified way of working, of cooperating. We at the European level have our very own negotiation system, how the institutions interact with each other, and so on and so forth. And there we are not that flexible enough to really work against it. As a politician, honestly, I think well, it's not the only thing we can do, because there are also legal answers to that, there are also political answers to that. But as an individual politician here, the only thing you can do is actually reach out to as much people as you can, create an atmosphere where you can discuss, create an atmosphere where people do feel the possibility to speak openly about the threats, about their feelings, about their reactions to that, and then create an answer to that. Easier said than done, honestly. But I think we did it quite a lot at European level so far. We're not there yet, I would say, because again, it's a very dynamic field, and whatever we found as a solution might be outdated the next day.
Might be outdated. So the thing is breaking the silos. I think we all acknowledge that this is the thing we need to do. Why haven't we already done it? General Vetter.
Allow me one additional sentence. I agree to everything that you said. I guess what's been strikingly clear is the broad toolbox, ranging from means like espionage to get economic advantages or military advantages to disrupting societies. So this is the really challenge, this broad toolbox that an adversary can inflict on us. Well, in theory, our first and so far only national security strategy, issued 2 years ago, is asking for integrated security. So this is this notion of breaking the silos, getting holistic pictures, getting societal understanding, have institutional organizations to play on this integrated security part. However, in fact, reality still tells a different story. Good news is we have a cybersecurity architecture in place. We have a National Cyber Response Center who is up and running, who's getting more professional by the day. However, we really haven't achieved that much progress in the last 3 years to make our cybersecurity architecture more operational and even more capable as it already is. It's not bad, but there is still room for maneuver. Even if we have a national cybersecurity architecture, what about the information domain? How do we get a holistic picture of what's going on in this hybrid environment? Do we have a clear understanding? And the third point, and I agree to Ms. Dupont, where's the societal debate on all of this?
Because it's about risk awareness.
Yep.
It's good that we have it, but they should also have it.
We had,
I mean, I guess the panel,
the audience
the public has
answered
it.
that they are pretty aware of the perception
but
change.
we're still in a bubble here. I mean, it's the Munich Security Conference. It's still a bubble, although a rather large one, but it is still a bubble, and we need to be aware of that.
To be quite honest, there are some European tools you can use. After October 7th, for example, there was a flood of disinformation. I think even one of the commissioners said it, going on, and I think it was not only individuals spreading this, it was orchestrated. Do you think that you have the right tools to counter that? Because our audience, the feelings of the individual is, of course, targeted by TikTok and all the meta platforms. Do you have the right measurements to target that?
Well, I think at a certain point we are outpaced by the dynamic, in a sense of we at European level, in combination with the national level, it takes quite some time to coordinate the European and the national level at various stages, not to say to coordinate also with NATO, is actually we do have instruments at hand. So we have the hybrids toolbox, we have the cyber diplomacy toolbox, we have measures like the DSA, the DMA, although I'm a bit critical actually because the DSA was mainly focusing on the kind of internal market dimension, not necessarily on the law enforcement side of that. So leaving to a certain extent out the societal dimension, which is, I would say, one of the weak spots also of the DSA. But we have tools at hand. I mean, the newly elected commission and the commissioner specifically, Henna Virkkunen, for tech sovereignty and security and the rule of law, basically took up the fight specifically with X. It was a kind of ongoing fight also from the previous commissioner. I think everyone has followed it on various social media channels, by the way. So there is already an answer to that. Is it enough? I doubt it. Because again, coming back to the dynamics we're actually facing and we're in, is that we need to do more when it comes to information exchange. We need to have clear emergency protocols, both at European, combined with a national level, combined ideally with what NATO can do, so that we can enhance our preparedness as such. And I think there is a bit of outlook until the end of this month, probably beginning of next month. We will have 3 main papers actually coming, being published at European level, which is one, the defense white paper, the internal security strategy, and the preparedness strategy. And these 3, also covering elements of cyber, of course, need to be interlinked as much as possible in order to be as effective as possible.
I don't want to be rude, but we have a lot of papers. We also have a national security strategy. But, well, let's hope for the best.
Well, it's starting again with completely true, and I just said on a side talk, also coming from plenary this week, whoever says it's a wake-up call again, I'm personally bringing that person out of the plenary. But indeed, it starts with risk awareness. And what we see in the European Union so far is that there is a bit of a, I would say, a geographical divide. So we have member states of the European Union who are highly alerted, highly aware, and we have member states who are not yet, I would say. And this is actually something we need to work on, because if there's specifically one member state in the midst of the European Union who does not take national security and European security as important as it should be, it creates a loophole within the European Union, and this needs to change.
Maybe talking about cooperation, Pavlina, I think it was Yossi from Israel who said we need overall cooperation. And maybe also with the platforms, which seems not that likely at the moment that all of the platforms will help and support. When you look at different countries or different regions of the world, what are best practices that we could, as Europeans, for example, use that have already proven to be successful, countering disinformation, scanning the information sphere, maybe?
I wanted to make like very small detour because when you and then I will come back to your question, because when you did the, I just find like when we discussed the impacts and you mentioned the fear factor, and it's so incredibly important because when I mentioned that like on top of the financial crime also like the data leaks happen, and specifically the actors call attention to these leaks and they try to victimize certain populations, etc. It's still, the research, for example, from Russia in the UK shows that when it comes to financial crime, still like very little amount of these attacks actually lead to such data weaponization. But there's the fear factor. So even if you have few of these attacks, it's basically the like kind of terrorist attack impact. It doesn't mean that you are that it will, you know, that it's probable that it will happen to your data, but because you see that it's happening, you become very scared to use, for example, certain services. So it can harm populations in the future, for example, not using certain healthcare facilities because they are scared about their information, or they are scared that. That such information will be misused, and we definitely saw the kind of like the comparison to the terrorist groups also with self-attribution when the groups started to attack each other, belligerent countries, with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and with many attacks, as we were following the attacks on critical infrastructure over 2 years. We saw that many attacks that we could map, and it's important to note that many of other attacks you cannot map. Like you map for example, as a civil society organization, you map a pinnacle of those. So you're trying to have a snapshot and see what is happening. And many of those would be, for example, DDoS attacks, which were self-attributed with a proof. So you see that the attack actually happened, but they self-attributed it like a terrorist organization would do. And this is the fear factor. So I just find, as we are discussing also the societal resilience and all society approaches and how we have to pull our awareness but also preparedness up to speed, I find this very important, that there is this terrorist attack effect of actors, and especially proxies of states in cyberspace, which align with their geopolitical vision. And when it comes to cooperation on exchange of, especially I work on cybercrime convention, so on exchange of electronic evidence and how important it is and how you need to put incentives for public and private sector. And I think there have been really incredibly good things happening in the past. For me, one of the bright examples is also like looking at the US space was what CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the US, have been doing in the past years. And they've been actually, when we discussed that, it's not only the cyber attacks on the infrastructure level, but you have to understand the whole landscape with understanding also the information space. Like this is something how they extended their activities and monitoring these attacks and actually calling on those actors and calling them not fancy names, but calling them what they are. They are criminal groups. They are state actors who are disrupting the democracy. So I think, for example, with that work, there was a lot of good done, and also with the collaboration with the private sector, which is extremely important, but extremely difficult in many senses, because you need trust. You need trusted environment that you know also, and this is something that when we looked into cooperation on cybercrime and private-public partnerships, I did this over 20 interviews over different stakeholder groups. And what I was surprised about personally was that it always came down to trust. Do we trust each other to exchange information? Do I have legal guarantees that you will, both from private sector, but also reputational, potential reputational damage, which public sector fears, that if we exchange information, it will not be used against me. Can I exchange it safely? Do I exchange it timely? And we had some very coordinated actions to put down cybercriminal gangs between different countries and with private companies. And this is operational cooperation which needs to be taken on systematic basis. So how we can do that. And I think also with what we've seen with Europol organizing with public-private partnerships, we see international counter-ransomware initiative, having the panels on public-private partnerships. So I think there is a lot of good things going on. But of course, as the threat landscape is evolving and is changing, this cooperation is rather new. It lasts a couple of years or several years at best. It still needs to bring results. But it's definitely a right step forward. And yes, and when it comes to this information space, it's very difficult. I find it, especially for me, it's a rather sensitive topic when you look at information space from international law perspective, because it was stigmatized topic in cybercrime convention when countries such as Russia, Iran, China wanted to have, for example, speech offenses in the treaty, so we can exchange electronic evidence on speech offenses, on excitement to extremism and terrorist offenses and crimes against national security through content-related offenses. And then you see what you also saw in the past days, how difficult it is to consider disinformation on very international level and achieve like common baseline on what disinformation even means nowadays on this level. And in Europe, we also see that it's not easy to determine what is disinformation for different governments, because with legislations it will, and different governments, it changes what is considered even disinformation. So this makes it extremely problematic to take consistent steps and improve the information environment.
When we talk about, you mentioned a lot of initiatives that are pretty positive. For example, the counter-ransomware initiative, which was established by the Biden administration, bringing a lot of countries together and finding solutions to the problem of ransomware and proxies. Now we have a new government in the United States, and we are not sure if international cooperation will last in this regard. Lena, you mentioned the wake-up call. We all can't hear, don't want to hear. Is it understood that there is the need for a new perspective on international cooperation in Europe?
Well, I mean, the basic founding principle of the European Union is actually cooperation, learning from each other. When you look at the history of the European Union, the integration process, it's basically that. Collective learning, collective answering also to challenges. I wouldn't necessarily say, and I think this is true internationally, in the European Union, but also nationally, it is a bit of a time to really test on whom we can rely on. In a sense of, we're not yet sure if we still get the amount of information by intelligence that had come from mainly one, well, basically only one international partner also to our intelligence. So that means we need to ramp up the tools, the means, the techniques, of course also the funding and the structure of our very own intelligence service. We probably should look out for synergies at European level, because we're not the only ones facing that problem. But we need to be very decisive and very critical, actually, also already within the European Union, with whom we share information and on what extent. This is cynically enough, having said that, as a dedicated parliamentarian of the European Union, but we need to be realistic. And this is actually something that is, I would say, one of the most prominent wake-up calls that we have gotten in the past. But there are also things to look at. And for example, when you look at those who have more experience basically in countering cyber attack, hybrid attack, disinformation campaigns, and so on and so forth, look at the Nordics, look at the Baltics, look at Poland, for example. Yeah? They do have developed their tool, and we can actually learn from that. We can learn at national level, but again also at European level, or for example, look at the way Interpol is sharing information. They have a very dedicated checks and balances system on how they share information, and member states still have the prerogative, of course, if they want to share or not. But actually, this is also a database which could benefit not only the military side, but of course also the civilian side.
General Vetter, I have a diabolic question for you. And it is, why aren't we using proxies?
Well, I guess the very short answer would be we are liberal democracies. We have a certain set of standards, be it legal standards, be it ethical standards, and I think this we should never allow us to use proxies. So we are not on a level playing ground, that's true, but I'm convinced that we should not use any instrument and any tool that our adversaries are using against us. And actually, we should not underplay the huge advantages of diverse societies, of rules-based societies, of democracies, of the ingenuity of people. And maybe we should try more to incentivize our people to realize this and to work together with us in this regard, rather than copying the instruments of our adversaries, which we don't think are adequate for us.
There had been some calls after after the start of the Ukrainian war to support hacktivists' war. And the question is, what is your perception of supporting hacktivists, and also what happens with them? Can they demobilize some kind of?
Actually, I had a very good understanding why people were willing to support Ukraine attacking Russian IT infrastructure. However, hacktivists normally don't have the intelligence that we have. The risk that hacktivists, by acting for a good cause, contribute to escalating a situation rather than de-escalating a situation is immense. And therefore, I'm really skeptical that hacktivism, for all the best understanding why people would do this, can contribute to solving a problem. So I would say, okay, let the professionals do the job. And actually, there's one thing. I'm now for 6 years in the MOD, for 6 years in Berlin, and for 6 years I hear this hackback notion. We will never do hackbacks. We are not stupid. This is not the shootout at the OK Corral. However, what we need to discuss in Germany, whether we would give the instruments to our security installations for active cyber defense. So if we have good intelligence, if we are quite aware, if we can get access to our adversaries, why shouldn't we also be allowed to take action, but never hack back? It's not a shootout. We will not do this. You have to do the things in cold blood and not you are attacked and now I hit him back. This is a recipe for disaster. So skeptical about hacktivism, plea for using the toolbox that we have and the capabilities that we have, but under a legislative control of a democratic state.
You gave me a great intro into using all the questions you gave us, and the first question, which got the most votes, is actually what you just mentioned, the hackback. And the question is, under what circumstances would the Bundeswehr take an offensive actions against a cyber attack on Germany? What kinds of actions would they be? And maybe when it comes to, like, I'm adding a little bit, does a proxy attack are you even considerate at a hackback?
So as I said, we will never do hackbacks. The Bundeswehr has the capability for offensive cyber operations. We have the legal framework to do cyber operations in very short terms is when we are on international crisis management missions, and the mandate of the German parliament includes the use of military force. This, in theory, also includes offensive cyber measures. However, there's a separate process in place in order to get this message. Give you one simple example. In Afghanistan, when we were on patrol in Afghanistan, we had to take good care that enemy improvised explosive device wouldn't do harm to our people, so we used electronic warfare measures to detect those devices and to take them out, which wouldn't be allowed in Germany. We would have much fun if we used those jammers and drive through Munich on a day. With regard to collective defense, collective and territorial defense, we can do everything which is covered by the international law. So this is the theoretical framework. The issue that we're having in peacetime conditions, definition of peacetime would be very interesting, is to see who in Germany is capable of performing active cyber defense measures. It's not only the Bundeswehr. And this is, first of all, a political decision to make, and second, we need the necessary legislation in place. I see that President Münch is also sitting here from our federal criminal police. They also have very, very good capabilities in cyberspace, so we need to have a decision on this. And unfortunately, throughout the last years, we were always meandering in this topic, but it needs to be settled in one way or another. So if we are in all-out war, I mean, then the military has a special role to play. But integrated security and integrated cybersecurity is not a job purely for the Bundeswehr. Our main message is to protect and defend our networks. But we have the capability, and now we have to have a reasonable discussion of how far will Germany go and who should carry out attacks.
Putting that on the list, task list for the next federal government. Okay. Next question, and I think, Paulina, it's perfectly for you. The question is, what is the impact of cryptocurrencies in funding non-state actors?
So when we discussed at the beginning who are the major actors, and I touched upon the big three, but the big four, and the fourth is North Korea, as one of those which provides sanctuary for cyber criminal groups. And actually, one of the specificities of those who are harbored by North Korea is stealing these assets and cooperating with the government and sponsoring the government back for providing them with the sanctuary and the collaboration. Definitely does have an impact on ransomware, because these payments become very untransparent, and anything that can add to these, that can blur what is happening in financial streams, is heading to that. So it does add to cyber criminal activity.
And how much does a digital proxy for social media costs? That's another question. How expensive is it to use a proxy?
Oh, but you know, it's very also important to understand that, like, proxy, as there are so many affiliations. It's just what it can mean on one side, it's absolutely different from the others. So today we covered the whole scope. Proxy can be someone who is very closely affiliated, doing attacks basically on behalf of intelligence units in a certain country, or it can be someone who does DDoS attack through basically application. So it's just like it's a huge variety, or someone who coordinates on information campaigns, but this coordination, while very important, can be also loose coordination. And I think especially now we see a lot of campaigns which start in information space, which start from coordinated, and then there is a loose network of accounts who share it, and in a semi-coordinated or even organic way, and this is problematic, especially for the disinformation environment. So, like, how does it cost? It may cost you nothing.
Okay. Before I open up the discussion with a mic, last question for Elena from the audience. After yesterday's speech by J.D. Vance, what has changed when it comes to cooperation with the US and fighting disinformation campaigns on social media?
I guess for good reasons, everyone is a bit cautious in really outlining already now what could probably change, but that there is a change, not only in terms of speaking about security, speaking about geopolitical implications, but speaking also about the transactional modus operandi of that government. It can already be said that it's going to be a rather bumpy road ahead of us. I would say, specifically when you look at the challenges we're facing at the European continent. We are as prepared as we can be. Again, at European level, of course, a plea for, well, we could be better prepared if member states allow us to be better prepared and to share not only information, but also best practices and the knowledge and the teams we are having, both when it comes to cyber, but of course also when it comes to real life. I would say that, and I think that this is a shared message here also at the security conference, we need to grow up as fast as we can and better yesterday.
Is it a, no, I wouldn't say.
It's a wake-up call.
Yeah. So, dear audience, your time now for directing questions. 2 rules. Please say your name and whom the question is directed to, and no speeches, just questions. So there's someone with a microphone going here.
Hallo, ich konnte auf Deutsch sprechen, aber muss man in das Englische also umspringen. My name is Tritan Hote, I'm from Tirana, I'm a professor of international relations, but my question is for the hair and military. You know, it's possible to develop, you know, a concept of arms control, including all, you know, powers and superpowers of our epoch, which are at odds with each other in order to reach or to establish a compromise, you know, related to the cyber attacks and artificial intelligence. Might be similar to the concept of arms controls related to the nuclear weapons. What do you think of it, please?
Thank you. An excellent question with a very difficult answer, I would say. Well, first of all, my depressing first analysis is currently it's obviously not the time for arms control or arms reduction, but for credible deterrence. Second, deterrence in cyberspace alone is another topic which is complicated. And third, arms control in cyberspace will be extremely difficult because most instruments are at least dual use. We have a huge variety of actors. I mean, arms control in the nuclear field compared to arms control in cyberspace is relatively easy. It's state actors, it's military. You have relatively good intelligence on the nuclear capabilities, and then you can impose regimes to control the spread of nuclear arms. So it's not easy, but it's less complex than cyberspace. In cyberspace, you have this magnitude of actors, and we heard about the broad toolbox that those actors have. So how can you regulate? How can you impose a regime? And how can you impose sanction on those who do not adhere to those international regulations, to those? So I think it's a topic to think about, but currently it's incredibly complex. So my number one answer, especially in military uniform, would be get our act together, make our networks as robust, resilient, and responsive as possible, so that we have a sound defense of our networks. Also make sure that we are, at least from our capabilities, able to also go after an attacker in cyberspace, because the least thing that we can tolerate is that an attacker can build a sanctuary where he can be sure that we will not come after him. So I think we need offensive cyber capabilities. However, I also know that it's very complex, difficult, takes a lot of time to impose offensive cyber capabilities if they should be successful. So in the end, do your homework, and hopefully when in a few years' time more reasonable people are in power, we can talk about deterrence and arms control in cyberspace, but currently actually my optimism is shrinking by the day.
Next question, please.
Can you hear me? I'm a Canadian living in Ukraine, and I'm spend a lot of time on the cyberspace looking at Russian narratives, Kremlin narratives. And as a result, because I used to work in Congress in Washington, it's very hard to disabuse the Kremlin narratives, and it has an effect on the war on the front line. So I'm thinking it probably will affect also, for example, the German election coming up. How do you defend against that? And I understand you can't have offensive operations, but you need to get the truth out there because people are getting brainwashed and voting according to Kremlin narratives, and people are dying, as you know. Thank you.
Danke. Would like to answer. No?
Probably the politician should go first, but it's actually one of the most trickiest questions to answer, in a sense of, I guess most of you are familiar with the so-called Böckenförde paradoxon. So you cannot force people to like and live a democracy. Democracy needs to be convincing in itself. That of course requires politicians to do their job and to uphold this not only the mandate, but also the political and societal task behind it. But it also requires people to take an informed choice, because votes actually do matter. And each and every single vote counts. I mean, remember local elections where, the recent local elections in some Bundesländer, where we actually had just a very small margin of 100 or maybe 120 votes going for one or another candidate. This is, of course, a very, well, it's a high-level answer, quite philosophical to a certain extent, but I think as well for the European level, by the way, as for the national level, we do have all tools and means at hand to really go through that challenging period. We do have it. We've done so before. So I think a bit of, again, the most difficult part of it, a bit of trust in society, in politicians, in journalists, in institutions, is actually worth investing. A second layer to that is, I think, what we actually do at European level in the way we are allowed to, but could probably also be done more, that's not necessarily better, but more on national level, is also having something like Stratcom. For various reasons, we are a bit bound in doing that ourselves, especially in Germany. But I think it's high time to recognize that it would be actually wise to do something like that. And there again, also examples we can draw our lessons from when it comes to that, although rather small now. But look at what, for example, the External Action Service, EU versus Disinfo, is doing. It's a bit of trying to counter at least the narratives and explain what are the reasonings behind a decision, behind a political process, the way we actually negotiate at European level, at national level. And again, coming back to the individual politician, it's always then me who needs to take a decision. So I need to listen to as much people I can. I need to take my own inspiration and information from whomever I can. But in the end, I need to be able to defend the decision I had taken. And this is accountability. This is what you can expect also from your politicians. And I think that this is also something where society and politician, without going into this kind of divided two bubbles approach here, it can work better than it had in the past. And it should, and it needs to.
We have one more question, two more questions. Okay.
Yes, thank you. My name is Leo Kazin, and you have mentioned health data as a kind of a target, and we in Germany are now introducing a new health file that seems to lack in security. And now with the push, especially in Germany, to kind of make up for digitalization, where we have not done that in the past, do you think we should maybe take a step back and look at cybersecurity first before we push for digitalization, or is it maybe something that you just have to take and then do that afterwards?
I'm happy to start with
please.
that. But then the specific German aspects I will leave to my co-panelist. I mentioned medical data because medical facilities and healthcare and such have been a preeminent target. Attacks against critical infrastructure as such have been growing, but they have increased. When it comes to healthcare, it's different because they also increased in the COVID times, because especially ransomware attacks, but also cyber espionage, which was connected to coronavirus pandemic, was happening at a large scale and skyrocketing at those times. And then it continued with a tense geopolitical situation and these attacks being normalized in a sense. And why these attacks are so common, and especially, for example, in the US, is that all over the world, but mostly US organizations are very often, healthcare organizations are very often targeted by ransomware attacks, is that the cyber security measures came as afterthought. Especially if you take that you have management of a hospital, what do you want to do as the first thing is to secure operation, give it to the healthcare, give it to the provisions of health in the first place. So these kind of cyber security best practices and data protection, etc., were coming as an afterthought. And then you have a combination of environment which is custodian of extremely sensitive and expensive data that you can seek ransom, and on the other hand, you have many vulnerabilities which have been introduced. And now we are also touching upon the real problem in the supply chains, because we have issue with vendors and insecure systems that these hospitals are using. And this is something that, for example, European Resilience Act, but also Secure by Design and similar initiatives across the world are trying to solve. So, as I'm not in a position to speak about particularly Germany, definitely this is a key problem in healthcare, that you have many of those attacks, and this really hurts me physically when I hear about it. Some of the biggest attacks, like Change healthcare attack in the US, which impacted data approximately of 190 million people. Like, we are speaking about half, this was the largest hack, but we are speaking about more than half of the population. And these attacks are not extremely sophisticated attacks. They are done by ransomware as a service groups, who operates basically as a business and cyber criminal group. But at the same time, what happens is that it starts from phishing attack. You click on a link, and why it goes so far, it's often there wasn't multi-factor authentication in place. There was vulnerability in the system, which is going like Move-It hack, which influenced like so many organizations, because you have vulnerability in widely distributed system. So you oftentimes we have this conception like, oh, it must be so sophisticated with these actors, but it often comes to very basic requirements which are not met. And then we see where regulation and this kind of building resilience and cybersecurity come in place, because we see in spaces where data security and protection is lower, and where, for example, exceptions on medical information is only being introduced as a higher level of protection and thought around it, there is higher incidence of these attacks.
Two sentences maybe. Stop digitalization because cybersecurity is an issue is probably not the answer. You wouldn't stop driving a car because there are accidents. But being aware of the risks is important. So first of all, you must think cybersecurity by design from scratch. It starts with the awareness. So don't click any link. That's education, that's awareness, that telling people that cyberspace can be risky and have the right assessment of your individual risk. Second, cybersecurity by design. Look at the quality of the software. For example, BSI, our Federal Office for Security, for Information Security, issues a lot of standards, issues a lot of recommendations, adhere them. But turning back the time, I think, is not the answer to the question. It's a challenge, but it's manageable. And actually, there's risk everywhere in life. So there are risks we have to take, but there are also instruments where we can reduce the risk to reasonable amount. This would be my very, very short answer to, I know, complicated question.
So, please, we are over time. So, Lena, maybe last words, and we have some time to discuss outside. So, use this time. Lena, maybe.
Yeah, just probably the last sentence to that is I mean, we've sent a bunch of, I guess, every mayor had been in Estonia, watching digitalization in Estonia and trying to grab the best practices there. I know, of course, it's different if you have a smaller country to digitalize, but if we don't start doing it, the digital gap we are already experiencing within the European Union is enormous. That's one thing. It's an economic question, it's a societal question, but the probably most striking part of that is that does not necessarily mean that everyone else is also stepping back on digitalization. So we would be even more out in the jungle if we just stop it.
Mm-hmm. So security by design it is. Yep. Thank you so much for this panel, for your insights. It's been great to listen all the different perspectives. And thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much as well from my part. One thing I think, or two things might be we can take with us. One thing is that this area of cyber, my sense is will become even more prominent than less. And the second is, and we try to trigger this a little bit, with the two statements coming from Israel and Taiwan, that it is very, very important not only to look into our immediate vicinity, but as well beyond what China is doing, what Iran is doing, what North Korea is doing, and obviously what Russia is doing. And I found this really quite intriguing to see. We are not alone. We are not the only victims, but there are many others, and there are many other actors as well out there. So let me thank the panel very much. Lena Dupont, General Michael Vetter, Pavlina Pavlova, and obviously our moderator, Johannes Steger.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you as well very much. I mean, it is, I think, quite impressive, that we could fill up the ranks here in the America House. And the discussion, the questions very much proved how important not only the subject is, but as well how knowledgeable the audience sitting here and attending this event is. And to give you more space to discuss, we thought it might be good to have a small reception, and I would like to invite everybody to this small reception and continue the discussions while eating and drinking. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.